Oh, I guess I have to add myself to the stream. If you heard me gibbering earlier, I said this is the first time I'm using StreamYard, so just getting accustomed to it. Do I cut out whenever I go to the next tab? I just want to get a. I like it. Yep, I'm in. So, well, welcome everybody to another edition of Uncut History. What we're going to be doing tonight is we're going to be talking about the Waco siege, or what's known as the Waco siege that occurred in 1993. Particularly, we're going to focus on the shootout that occurred on February 28th, 1993. Now, I was originally going to do this yesterday, but very busy day, doing a lot of editing, and don't feel fully confident to do today. I'm going to be quite honest. I didn't get all of my information as much as I want to, but if I don't do this now, I'm never going to. The reason I've been busy, I finally got a new computer. If you've been watching my videos for some time now, you know I've been complaining of a lack of computer. So I've I bid the bullet and I got myself a new, nice, fancy Asus gaming laptop. Tough. Now that's TUF. So take that as you will. They can't spell, but hopefully they can do computers right. So the past week I've been having fun just working with a computer that actually works. That's the only way I can describe it. And this week I've been editing the Retracing History episode, which the next one will be on the Winter Spectacular at the East Broad Top. I've been posting about it on all my social medias the past couple weeks. It was a wonderful weekend, a wonderful time. There had been thousands of people at Rock Hill Furnace. It was ridiculous how many people that we had. So yeah, that was fun. But also, like I said, this is the first time we've been using StreamYard. So something like this stream is just going to be just playing around, seeing all that I can do in free mode, which probably isn't a whole lot. So right now I'm just tinkering. I wanted to get some slides in here. Apparently, you have an option for Google Slides, but it just keeps giving me an error screen, and I was too dumb to actually put the photo in. Now, I wonder what happens if I share screen. Well, we'll worry about that another day. So, ooh, what happens if I do this? Oh, well, nothing, because I guess that's if you have multiple people. I'm like a kid in a candy store right now. Cinema layout. Ooh, cinema layout. Does it give you a cinematic layout? I don't see anything on my screen. Solo layout. Yeah, that's what I want. Picture in picture layout. I don't think anything will change unless I pick something. So, well, without any further ado, I'm rambling here. Let's get into what we're talking about tonight. And like I said, that is the Waco siege, which I am young and I am still learning a lot of history, but I've already come to the conclusion that this may be one of the most controversial events to ever happen in American history. There is nothing that is concrete on what happened other than the date where the key events occurred is what I found. Regardless of what source you take from, it's a biased source and there's contradicting evidence. So this is by no means going to be a thorough analysis of what happened. Tell you what, before I go any further, I should have just had this on standby. One of the videos I watched while I was doing proper research, which one not to say that his videos aren't proper research, is Wendigoon's videos. If you've not seen any of his videos, he usually does the odd and weird of history. I did a really good video on the what was it called, the Mountain Lights down in the Carolinas. Anyways, he did a hour and a half, might as well have been a feature length documentary on the Waco siege, and I'm gonna post that right now in the comments. Okay, it's not the greatest link in the world, but you get my drift. Oh, there we go. There we go. Oh, look at that. It's so weird. Ooh, but they could take it away. They could put it on. They could take away. I told you, I'm just gonna get distracted tonight. I'm having way too much fun with. Oh, it's going in. It's going out. I'm having way too much fun with Steam Yards. Anyways, so, very controversial event. This is not a thorough analysis of what happened, but I do want to go through on particularly what happened the day of the shootout, which kicked off the 51-day siege. So, very briefly, let's get into it. who were, or I should say, still are, the Branch Davidians. They are a group, small sect that's broken off from several different sects that eventually find their traces back to the Seventh Day Advent Church. Am I saying that right? Hopefully, I'm saying that right. Uh, Again, long story short, we're not gonna. The religious stuff is just not my thing, which probably makes this a horrible live stream to talk about this event because religion is everything. We get into it, but essentially, we're dealing with a small little group of Christians who are under the have a certain interpretation of the Bible, particularly the seven what the seven seals are, and they believe they have figured out that the apocalypse is coming to the near future. So, hooray, apocalyptic cult, we're already off to a great start in this stream. Uh, they're pretty famous for one of their leaders, which was Vernon Howe, who changed his name legally to David Koresh in the early 1990s. And they ended up having a small little compound out about, I think it was about 20 miles from Waco, Texas. Actually, the community of Elk, Texas is a lot closer to where the Davidians set up their compound. Essentially, the idea was they were going to move away from most big civilization and be able to live off the grid, not relying on any support from any government agency, and essentially practicing a community until the apocalypse comes and their compound would be sanctuary. Now, the twist that we get into the story is that uh, there is such a backstory. There's such a crazy backstory on how Vernon Howe, aka David Koresh, got power in the Branch Davidians that I have not enough time really to get into. But essentially, every time there's like a new leader in the Branch Davidians, they fragment and it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. If that makes sense. And David Koresh first came involved with the Branch Davidians around 1981. Uh, he had an well, it's not surprising when you get to these stories. Did not have a really good home life. He was the child of a 14-year-old mother, had some learning disabilities, but was able to memorize the Bible and any religious scripture very well. And one thing leads to another. He comes up with this interpretation that he is the Messiah, that he is God's child, but he's also a sinner, and that he is going he is going to bear the sin, all these sins, which essentially was him taking all of the luxuries of life, which including that he is going to have all the children in his community. So he is having relations with just about all the women in his little community at Mount Carmel. Uh, I've heard rumors too that his room had air conditioning. It was the only had air conditioning. Everyone had this and that. Although I'm sure that's more rumors than anything else. I don't know. Again, everything about this event is controversial. There's no there's no solid ground to stand on. The previous leader of the Branch Davidians did not like Koresh, did not like his beliefs, and also did not like the fact that Koresh was winning quite a following amongst the Davidians, kicked him out. Koresh went on kind of a pilgrimage around the world for a few years, collect a few followers, came back to the Mount Carmel compound. Eventually, there was a power struggle, which I kid you not led to the previous leader of the Branch Davidians digging up a corpse and challenging Koresh to a resurrection off. Uh, the reports are that Koresh said, "No, I ain't playing with that. Actually, I'm going to turn you in for desecrating a grave." And when they sent photographs to the local sheriff's office, they needed more proof. So they wanted Koresh's team to go photograph the bones, apparently. So they go back armed. There's a shootout. Koresh and his followers are taken in handcuffs, but later there's a mistrial on any attempted murder case. And ultimately, that previous leader basically ousts himself by he was so paranoid of David Koresh taking over the Branch Davidians that eventually one guy who starts saying is basically saying, "Hey, this is some interesting interpretation this guy has." He killed a Branch Davidian. This ex-leader killed a Branch Davidian with a axe, no less, because he thought he was one of Koresh's spies. That led to the previous leader being ousted. Koresh moved in, implemented all of his policies, and that kind of sets up what begins the investigations of Mount Carmel. So there were several ex members of the Branch Davidians who, in the early 90s, were starting to send in reports of child abuse, sexual assault, things of that nature. They were also reporting possession of illegal firearms in the facility. And around 1992, when a UPS driver is dropping off some packages at Mount Carmel, it drops and hand grenades come out. So eventually, the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, they got tipped off about what was happening, and they start doing preliminary investigations. Uh, Not necessarily related to the ATF. At one point, Child Protective Services did go in and investigate Mount Carmel, and reported they found nothing. There was a Australian news group that went in the early 90s and did a full-on interview with David Koresh and with select Branch Davidians, and although they were very put off by this cult-like community that was going on there, they couldn't find any evidence on child abuse, although to contradict that, it should be noted that David Koresh took a wife who was 14 years old. That's icky. And there were accusations from the ex-Davidians that he was having relations with people as young as 12. Very icky. But this really doesn't have much to do with the ATF when you think about it. This should be Child Protective Services, not alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. So so what really also gets the ATF really invested into what's happening at the Mount Carmel compound is the events of August of 1992. Uh, if you go to Idaho, you may or may not heard of this story, the Ruby Ridge standoff, where a small family that were part of a neo-Nazi group in northern Idaho, basically they had cut themselves off from civilization, especially after they got into a now I'm trying to get into something I've really done not proper research on, but essentially they cut themselves off from civilization after a botched search warrant, for the lack of better terms. They were pulled over and searched for firearms and then given a court hearing, and they were just too scared to come down from the mountain. So the ATF went up. There was a shootout. One of the family's sons was killed. The mother of the family was killed. It was horrible, horrible for the horrible cover. It just looked horrible. So the ATF were looking to win brownie points back in the public eyes, and they come across this story of a religious cult here in out of rural Texas, and they're like, "Oh, what?" That essentially the idea is, wouldn't it be nice if we go in and we raid this compound, take the cult leader prisoner, and free all these kids from their hostage situation. We will redeem ourselves in the eye of the public. The eye of the public. So in late 1992, the ATF set up a watch position in his dilapidated house across the street from Mount Carmel. And well, across the street, they're at the intersection, like Mount Carmel, several hundred feet back off the way. But it's plains, it's Texas, so you can see across. And one of those ATF agents was a guy by the name of Robert Rodriguez. And Rodriguez went over to Mount Carmel very regularly, eventually took part in a 2 week Bible session with Koresh, essentially to assimilate himself as one of their own, to try to win their trust. Although reading from sources from Davidians that were in the compound around this time, Koresh already had figured out Rodriguez was likely a plant of the ATF, but he felt that he could convert Rodriguez to the Davidians' practices. And a lot of the Davidians were against this idea, but Koresh went with it anyways. So Rodriguez is becoming part of the community for several months. Meanwhile, while this is all occurring, he's snooping around trying to find any evidence of illegal firearms. Now, the what comes to light is the Branch Davidians, one of the ways they were making profit to sustain themselves was through gun shows. And as far as I'm aware, from most of the research I've done, is that they did have an FFL. They were legally allowed to sell firearms, and they were carrying quite the firepower in the Mount Carmel compound. Uh, they listed the address when they would go to these gun shows, I should rephrase this. When they go to these gun shows, the people representing the Davidians that were selling, they're working under the store name of the Mag Bag. Essentially, what this was just whenever they were purchasing a gun or send funds to the Mag Bag for the gun shows, it was going to Mount Carmel. It wasn't a true store. It was really just a name they used when they operate at these gun shows, which is not an uncommon thing. It still occurs today. A lot of these gun stores aren't actual gun stores. They're people with FFLs and they go to various shows and sell them, things like that nature. So, but apparently, when you start reading into the ATF stuff, they really apparently didn't quite connect the dots that no, 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 this is like a common thing that occurs at gun shows. They were thinking it was like some front for some secret operations. It was pretty on the table what the Branch Davidians were doing, which was buying massive quantity of firearms and then flipping them at gun shows. So Rodriguez goes in, he's investigating. I don't think he ever actually saw the supposed armory. I don't think Koresh allowed him anywhere near it because, again, Koresh was pretty confident he was a plant. But while this is all occurring, there were other investigations. The ATF are starting to compile all these, I guess, all these quotes from ex Davidians about what the current Davidians are housing in his armory. And we're looking at the likes of AK-47s, of AR-15s, M16s, hand grenades, grenade launchers, a lot of lower receivers when it comes to items like the like M16s and AR-15s, a lot of different items, things of that nature. Had a number laying around here somewhere. I think it was like 480,000 something dollars in explosive paraphernalia is what they suspected the Davidians had. So this research goes on for some time as the ATF try to put together a warrant to arrest Koresh and to essentially raid the compound. As we go into, I had a list somewhere. Hold on one moment. I am so unprofessional, but let's be honest. None of you guys are watching this live. Well, if you're watching this live, thank you. If you're not, I understand and I apologize during the restream. See, look, I got a piece of paper in front of me to make everything all the more better. And while we're doing that, I'm going to just peek over, see what's happening over here. Do I break off? I keep asking, do I break off when I go over here? Do, 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 do. My computer's. You know, one time you want your computer to do something. I want to go over just check this one little detail. Now, it wouldn't work. I'm going to take assumption that we are still live and nobody's. All right, never mind. I'm getting paranoid over nothing. Anyways, so I should just grab this earlier when I was going to start signing off money. Uh, was nowhere near that. It was like $44,300 worth of explosive paraphernalia. I was way over off. I apologize, folks. All right, where were we at? Okay, Ruby Ridge. Yeah, we did that. Blah 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 blah. So okay, they're putting the warrant together. The ATF are putting the warrant together. We get into early January now of 1993, and a UPS driver shows up one day and asks to use the restroom and goes in, but he's starting to snoop around in different places he shouldn't be. And Koresh calls the local law enforcement to report that a plant had come and visited his home and is getting upset over it. Eventually, we also get around to the time late January that Mark England of the Waco Tribune Herald starts contacting Mount Carmel, and he wants to put together a editorial about what's happening in the compound. Uh, the Branch Davidians offer that if you want to come visit, if you want to come to the compound to interview, we're more happy to do that. He says no, and they're like, "Well, do you want to meet in Waco?" No, we'd rather do it over the phone. And the Davidians refuse to answer any questions over the phone. So suspicion is definitely growing that they're being watched. That something is coming down the line for them. So we eventually get to February 25th, 1993, and the warrant is officially issued. And this warrant is very interesting. Uh, not only it talks about firearms, but it's also talking a lot about the aforementioned child abuse charges, the sexual charges. It's talking also about a possible drug basically drug plant on the Davidians property. What this is alluding to is several years back that ex Davidian, I was talking about the ex Davidian leader. His name, I believe, was George Roden. I His way of making funds for the Davidians was essentially to allow to have a illegal drug operation occurring at the far end of the property, kind of under the table, out of sight, out of mind, but we'll take the profits from it. When Koresh came in, he ordered for that to be dismantled and taken down. So why the heck is this on the warrant? Why is this one of the reasons the ATF's getting involved? The theories are that the ATF wanted to be able to use in order to get as much support as possible, especially from like Texas National Guard, that they were tacking on these drug charges. So they're like, all right, this isn't just a gun situation. Uh, it's very paper thin, a lot of the warrants. And there's also the simple fact of they could have just got David Koresh while he was out. The Branch Davidians regularly went to Elk and regularly went into Waco. It wasn't like they were isolated there 24/7. I said that they were living off the grid. It's not fully true. As far as they did have electrical hookup. Uh, it was just aside from that, everything else was kind of their own thing. But they went into town regularly. They knew a lot of the local people in Elk and in Waco. They were acquaintances of several of the law enforcement. They had dinners most nights. They were playing music. So that's what I said. It gets very weird when you deal with the situation. It's not your traditional cult that's cut off, sealed off from the rest of the world. They were very much a part of the Waco community. I'm not saying that they were friends with everybody and everybody knew each other. I'm not nothing like that or liked each other. Nothing like that. But it's just one of these. The Davidians, including Koresh, made themselves out in the open more often than not. And Koresh was known to go on morning jogs right past where Rodriguez and his fellow agents had their outposts at. So th- it's been one of the biggest criticisms, and including myself, I make this criticism all the time about what's about to follow. Why didn't they just nab him there? It's been said that the agents that were at that outpost were misinformed, that they were under the impression that the Koresh rarely left the compound, that it was impossible, which again is weird to me. How could they be misinformed when Rodriguez and his colleagues were seeing it with their own eyes? There was some clear miscommunication occurring between Rodriguez and going back to Washington, D.C. But anyways, this search warrant is issued, and for the us also record, it's your typical search warrant. The ATF have to roll up and essentially announce their presence and give the Davidians a reasonable time to respond before they can enter the property. So you can't just come down with a battering ram without, FBI open up. That's not how this warrant. It's not a no knock warrant. Essentially, what I'm saying there. I could have saved myself a minute of time. So the warrants issued February 25th to search the Mount Carmel compound. And then February 26th, the World Trade Center is bombed. Now, I'm not talking about 9/11. I'm talking about the car bombing that occurred in the basement of the Twin Towers in 1993, killed six people. It was an Al Qaeda attempt to bring down the towers, but in a more traditional sense of having car bomb. Okay, again, I'm going down a whole other rabbit hole. We got to talk about Waco. We got to get to the shootout. So, a lot of the higher ups in the government are starting to get cold feet over the Waco raid, as the warrant is already somewhat paper thin. And now we have this issue going on with Al Qaeda. They want to shift focus, but the ATF insists on going on with the raid. So everybody else wanted to cut it except the ATF, and they're going ahead with it anyways. And by February 27th, they already got about 100 agents at Fort Hood, Texas. Now I've heard people say that they were at Fort Hood to essentially run a mock setup of the Mount Carmel compound. I found other sources to say that's not what that they wanted to do that, but they didn't have time to get it set up, and all they got was basic communication drills down Fort Hood. And the plan of attack for the ATF is they're going to put their agents in these cattle trailers, and a convoy are going to run all the way up to Waco, surround the compound, with aerial support, no less. They are going to be coming in with free helicopters from the Texas National Guard. It was two Apache and one Black Hawk helicopter. And the plan was they were going, the plan was not to use these helicopters as firing positions, but rather, I guess, as observation positions to coordinate the arrest. You can see this is getting far bigger than a normal arrest. Now, on February 27th, 1993, the Waco Tribune Herald runs England's article I mentioned about earlier, which is labeled The Sinful Messiah. This is an infamous image connected with the siege. Again, I have found contradicting evidence. Some say that the ATF were originally going to raid Mount Carmel March 1st, but when the press released this statement, which would make the Branch Davidians suspicious if they weren't already, they bumped it up to February 28th. Then I've heard people say that the ATF had a direct hand in the publication of this editorial, that they were trying to get this editorial out before they made the raid. So looked, oh, how convenient. The public already knows that Koresh is a bad person. Now we're going to hit it. So did the ATF have a hand in this article? Did they not? If you can answer that in the comments, I would be more than happy, because we are finally to February 28th, 1993, which is a Sunday. I'm going to go down for the timeline of the events as best as I can. And while we're midway through, uh, the main resources I've been pulling from, there have been two of the more well publicized resources in recent years. One of which is Waco Survivor Story, which is by David Thibodeau, who was a Branch Davidian in the compound during the assault and later siege. As you could tell by the cover, this was one of the main bases for the miniseries that came out back in 2018, which uh, probably maybe someday I'll just do a video on the miniseries. I have my own opinions, mixed opinions on it. And to a lesser extent, I've also been using Stalling for Time by, let me show, oh, his name's up there, by Gary Nosner. He was not at the compound the day of day of the assault. He came in a few days later, but he does give a brief synopsis of what happened, and he provides a good, I guess he gives a good insider's perspective of what the thought process were of federal agencies like the ATF and the FBI in the early 1990s, and why mistakes were made at Waco. Uh, and of course, I've also been pulling from the actual warrant, the actual affidavit warrant that was issued. There are so many sources. Apparently, there's a new book that just came out, which I want to get my hands on. And this is not going to be the only live stream we cover the Waco siege on. I plan to do one about just the siege in general and one about the fire that ends the siege. So this is kind of maybe a 3-part live series. There's a new book that came out, and the author has uh, come to the conclusion that David Koresh essentially plagiarized other radical religious leaders, complete with the whole taking the name of Koresh, which, yeah, explains a lot. Explains a lot in my eyes. So we're gonna do a water break too. Yeah, you're gonna have to see me do a water break. I'm not sponsored by purified drinking water. All right, let's get in. Okay, let's get into the actual stand. A half hour in, let's get to the actual fighting, which I might not sound as much as an idiot on. So February 28th, 1993. Now, according to David Thibodeau's account, he had been told the night before that two Davidians by name of Paul and Kalania Feda were going to be going to a local gun show, and they were taking about half of the armory with them for the show to sell, which makes things interesting about the falling shootout. That makes question, how much firepower did the Branch Davidians really have? I don't think the ATF would have known this information, that the Branch Davidians were weak, but it's interesting nonetheless. So the Fedas go off to the gun show, at least from all that I've read and presume. And around 8 a.m., Rodriguez visits Mount Carmel. Essentially, he wants to gauge what the reaction is of Koresh and the Davidians of the Sinful Messiah release. And this is essentially where Koresh and Rodriguez both admit to each other that, yeah, I know who you are. Yeah, I know you know that who I am. Yeah, I know there's a raid coming, things of that nature. And they both try to figure out how do they make the situation not get any worse. Around 9 a.m., a news van is meandering its way around Royal, Texas, and come across a local postal driver and ask for directions to Rodenville. And Rodenville was the older name used to describe Mount Carmel. It turns out that the postal service man that they were talking to was David Koresh's brother-in-law, a guy by name of Dave Jones. So, oops. And then that also gets into a bit about the media, again, the controversies. Some claim that the ATF had already orchestrated for the media to be there because they wanted this to be a big success story for all the press to see, like, hey, look, we're not so bad guys after all. So there's reports that seem to suggest that the ATF were coordinating with at least with Texas news reporters to try to get them to the probable location. But I found other reports that say no, while the ATF were indeed trying to get news crews on the site, they didn't tell them the exact location. They didn't tell them the time. They didn't tell them the day. They just said, hey, we're going to be doing an operation in Texas in the coming days. So again, one of them controversies. So Jones goes flying off back to Mount Carmel to tell Koresh that there's a raid that's about to happen on the compound. Uh, Koresh basically lets Rodriguez go and tells him to do your best to stop what's going to happen because Koresh and the Davidians have already made their mind up what they're doing. They're going to defend the compound. So Rodriguez goes back to his holdout, phones the ATF, and tells them that the Branch Davidians know you're coming. They're prepared. But the ATF are already on their way. They're already making the 50-mile trek to the compound. The convoy is about a mile long. And again, I couldn't really find an exact number of the agents involved. And that's just because the numbers that are usually thrown out are involved in the entire siege, not what happened in the initial day. I'm just throwing a safe number of about 100 agents out. I think it sounds about fair. So around 9:45, the ATF convoy gets to the Mount Carmel compound. They pull in, and this is where I really wish I could connect because I actually had a photo of the compound, uh, but it's pretty easy to find one on the internet. They pull down the drive. They come bursting out of the trailers. Around the same time, you have the helicopters. They're going to start flying over, and I found that the helicopters apparently are they were off by a few minutes. I guess apparently they're supposed to come a little bit earlier, immediate, a little bit before or after. I don't know. I don't know. I'm confused. I'm confused by a lot of things with this raid. So we got helicopters circling around the compound. We got about 100 agents bursting out of these trailers, and something else to be keep in mind that several of these agents had taken time to write their blood type in marker around their necks in case they need a blood transfusion, which is not something the ATF normally does, not something a law enforcement unit normally does unless they're intending to go into battle. Does not look good. So, and again, I can't harp how controversial everything is that goes down. But from what I can interpret, Koresh opens the door. He is with about four armed individuals. He's standing at the front door. One of the agents announces for Koresh to surrender himself. This is a search warrant. A little bit late, a little bit late to say that. Uh, Koresh sounds like, from what I've heard from Thibodeau's account, that Koresh could not hear because of the sound of the helicopters, everything going on. So he keeps shouting, "What's going on? Got to stop! There are women, children in here." And then somebody fires a shot. And like in most of these tense situations, nobody knows who fires the first shot. The prevailing theory right now is that the ATF had a dog kill team because the Davidians had a group of dogs and out in part of the yard. And as the agents were fanning out from I'm trying to think visually, from the front entrance, which was roughly on the west side of the it's approximately the west side. The front entrance is approximately on the west side of the building, and now you have the agents fanning to the south and north ends of the building to encircle it. Apparently, they come across these dogs and start barking. The claim is that the first shots are the ATF agents shooting the dogs, but we also have reports that from the ATF agents that they safely, completely circled around back until they were ambushed by three individuals in the north back end around where the pole is of the property. So who knows who fired first, but once somebody heard a shot, everybody begins firing. You can look at the images online. The two white front doors are peppered with bullets. It seems very quickly that Koresh is wounded in the stomach and in the arm. One ATF agent is killed around this point. There are several other Davidians inside that are hurt from the initial gunshots. The doors are thrown shut, and the full firefight is on. So what starts happening is the ATF agents take cover. There's a small concrete, small like picket fence right in front on the west side of the building. There's also cars parked. They're using that for cover. They are firing up toward the second story floors where the Davidians are in position and returning fire down. We have fully automatic fire, probably going both sides back and forth. Uh, the Davidians start shooting at the helicopter circling. Now, to this day, the federal officials denied that the helicopter was any fire from the helicopters. Davidians to this day claim there was fire from the helicopters. It's up to anybody's interpretation because bullets are going left and right. All hell has broken loose near Waco, Texas. Essentially, what the strategy now is, the agents try to go to the south side of the building, and what they want to do is from Rodriguez reports that the probable location of the gun room is on the second floor across from David Koresh's personal bedroom. So they get ladders, they scale up on the roof, and then you have to imagine, I'm gonna have to use my imagination. You got like a one-story roof here, then on one end you got this three-story tower, and the other end you got a roof to the chapel and gymnasium. They're in between that. They scale up, they break through the window. Uh, they start firing at the Davidian. It's in the gun room. Like I said, it is complete chaos. It is hard to visualize what was happening as there are multiple areas where the agents are breaking through, but this seems to be the primary breach point. Three or four of the agents manage to breach through the window. They get in the gun room, but they find that a lot of the guns are now in the hands of the Davidians. And like the reason I mentioned earlier, how David Thibodeau claimed that the Fedas had gone to a gun show, that also seems to be supported by this, that when the agents get in, where are the guns? They presume it's all in the hands of the Davidians, which is partially true, but seems also that a lot of them are taken to a gun show. So the agents push through the gun room. I believe they do get in the hallway between the gun room and Koresh's room, but then are driven back. There's famously at this point there is a television crew filming at this window, and as the agents start retreating, you start seeing bullets breaking right through the wooden walls. One of the agents is hit. I believe also the agents tried to attack through the gymnasium, and I believe they actually breached. Yes, yes, they went. A group went through the gymnasium, breached in, and their plan was they were going to rendezvous with the ATF agents that were in the second floor, taking possession of the gun room. They come down to the first floor. That obviously didn't happen, and the agents in the gymnasium quickly realized that and pulled back. It's also reported that the water tower is shot at. There apparently one of the Davidians got on top of a water tank in the back corner around on the north side of the property. So apparently they're doing sniping fire, and the Davidians claim that that gentleman was shot by one of the helicopters, but the ATF claims forensic proves it was a ground shot. But that Davidian sniper is shot and killed. There is a gentleman in a room facing to the north side of the building in a living quarter. Not the north side of. He's in one of the living quarters near that water tower, and I get several reports. One from Thibodeau and one from I believe it was there was another one, but they both kind of make the same story. This gentleman was apparently shot right when the shooting started. It looks like he didn't even have a chance to defend himself as there was no gun inside his room, and he's laying dead in a pool of blood and mixture with water. Water starting to pour into parts of the building when the water tanks hit by the ATF agents. Uh, it's it's chaotic. The initial shootout's about 15 minutes. There's a brief lull, then the gunfire kicks back off again. A lull, another kick up and fire. Now, while all this is transpiring, um, I got to get notes. My brain's running dry. I know. Every time somebody tunes in, it's when I'm really boring and I'm reading my notes. Somebody just messaged me something. I don't know what that was. I'll look at that later on. Burr, 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 burr. Okay. Okay. So, Wayne Martin, one of the Branch Davidians in the initial shootout, gets on the phone, calls the The county sheriff, the local law enforcement, basically tells them, you know, he tells them there's women and children inside. Call the raid off. The problem is when the county law enforcement is trying to contact the ATF. Uh, it's really not working too well. There's so much going on. The people on the ground don't have access to a phone. It's complete chaos. So the shootout goes on for 2 hours. Eventually, a ceasefire is agreed upon around 11 a.m. to collect both sides, wounded and dead. And when the gunfire finally tails off at 11, 4 ATF agents are dead. Anywhere from 4 to 6 Branch Davidians are dead. Uh, about a dozen more ATF agents are wounded. Several of the Branch Davidians are wounded. It has been a complete mess for the ATF and has also put the Branch Davidians into a very bad situation. We now have dead federal agents. The Now this is going to become a much bigger situation for them. They will now be, yeah, they're going to be surrounded now. So as the day wears on, the ATF pull back. They set up a perimeter around the compound, completely laying siege to it. Local law enforcement will provide a second ring to control news coverage that is starting to arrive on the scene. More news coverage, as I say. There already were some news vans there recording the shootouts that went along. And the Branch Davidians would settle into the first of 51 days of being laid siege to. And that is where our story is going to roughly end for now. I really just want to talk about the build up and the shootout itself. Uh, I don't know, what can I say? I mean, anything you say is controversial on it. Like I said, anything you say is controversial on this, and anything you're going to say about Waco is going to be disputed, and you're the bad guy regardless of the situation. There's no good guys in this situation. Uh, like I'll get more in because since we're gonna do more of these live streams, we'll get more into the siege tactics and how that leads to the bigger disaster later down the line. But just looking at this at face value, how I view this, uh, the ATF were in a bad situation out of Ruby Ridge. They wanted to regain faith in the public eye. And this situation with the Branch Davidians sounded like a really good idea on paper, but it was not the ATF's department. This should have been handled by some other agency. And even if the ATF were going to handle it, it should have been handled in a much different way. I mean, when you have guys writing their blood type down on the back of their necks, this nobody, these guys were not, it seems like somebody's got, at least some of them were not going in with the idea that this was a simple arrest. They seem to be going in there wanting to go to war, is what this appears like. But on the Branch Davidian side of things, the Mount Carmel compound just not a as even if for as much as you get reports saying that everybody liked being in that community, it's just not a healthy relationship. It just does not come off as a healthy relationship. You got a guy who's claiming himself to be the second coming of Christ and saying that only he can sleep with the woman, and he is sleeping with women confirmed as young as 14. So that's not a good image at all. That's very bad. Not the most safe place for children to be in, especially yeah, these children's caught in the crossfire. So in like this situation, it's both sides blame. The ATF wanted to get publicity, and boy, did they get publicity out of it. It's just not the way they anticipated. And the Branch Davidians, those that had decided to live their life on that compound, they had decided to live in a very dangerous location, in my opinion. Even without the shootout that resulted, just just don't live with a madman that's claiming he's the second coming of Christ. That's just one of my warnings there. So I'm sure I've angered everybody by making this live stream. I can't make everybody happy. And like I said, I'm leaving certain things in the dark. Cause like I said, I know there's more to the siege story, but we will talk about that at a later date and time. But that's what I have to say right now on the Waco siege. Uh, what's coming down the pipeline for the future for the channel? Well, we got a new computer, and as I mentioned, new episode of Retracing History should be coming out. If not this weekend, definitely next weekend. Like I said, things have been very busy lately. Uh, I'm hoping to start being able to do live streams where I host guests. I would like to interview some individuals in the history community involved with museums, particularly smaller, newer projects that I would like to get the word out about. So, a couple ideas I've had. There's locally Patriot Park. I covered that in a video on the Flight 93 Memorial. It is a new memorial Pennsylvania dedicated to uh, American servicemen and women that were killed as a result of the war on terror. So I would love, they're one of the ones I would like to find a way if I can do an interview with them. I'm definitely interested. If I can talk to somebody from the East Broad Top Railroad, I mean, I'd be more than happy to do that. There's a couple other YouTubers that I've been following that I've messaged back and forth over the years that I've finally like to have the chance to get on a show like this. And it might not even be a live show, it might just be a I tape the recording and post later on. And with connection situations, that might be might be the best outcome. So yeah, yeah. God, I go through proof. I wrote all these notes. I go through and try my best to do these research, but it's you never have enough time to read in this world. You never have enough time to read in this world. And it's never to my liking. I guess that's the sign of a sign of any historian that you never can be happy with knowing enough of history. So, well, I'd like to thank you for watching this live stream, and if you're watching the recap, thank you for going through all my mumbling and rambling. If you like what you see here, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you've not done so already. And if you want to go the extra mile and supporting the channel, you can buy me a cup of coffee through Ko-fi, and the link is in the description below. So, thank you guys for watching. Hopefully I didn't, well, shouldn't say hopefully I didn't. Maybe I should have. Maybe I'm supposed to offend people when I talk about these things because history is not always the happiest thing in the world. I don't know. I covered the shootout at the Mount Carmel compound. Moving on. We'll see you guys in the next Uncut History.